This week on the podcast, we're going to take some email questions from listeners all around the area checking out the podcast on various forums. So let's get into some questions from folks just like yourself here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. What's going on this week, folks? How you guys doing out there? In the interwebs world, we are back with another episode, and we're going to do some email questions that have come in to Phil's website and to the podcast and various forums, and just kind of share some stuff from folks just like yourselves, because at the end of the day, Phil, you've been doing this a long time. If it's happening to one person, it's probably happening somewhat similar to other people. So it's a good way to kind of share real world issues that might spark a trigger for somebody.
Yep. It's always better to learn from somebody else's mistake or questions. So
true. Very, very true. What is it? Geniuses learn from the mistakes of others. Isn't that saying?
That's right.
Like that,
yep.
Right?
Yep.
So we'll dive in this week and knock them out, see if we can help some folks out with some trains of thought. So Judy had sent one in to us, and her question was, she had said, I just got married last month. Both of us in a later stage relationship. We're both in our late 60s, lost our prior spouses to cancer. So both our prior spouses passed away, and both have 3 kids each. So they bring their own assets to the marriage, although he has a little more than her, she says. So how do you make sure that his kids inherit the wealth he's built over the years, but also making sure that I'm going to be okay when I outlive him? So this is certainly an interesting question, and one that people suffer from a lot of times, Phil, when they do get like into second or third marriages, and they want to make sure that their legacy plan is kind of intact, but they also want to take care of the new spouse as well.
Right. And so these kind of blended families, I mean, this is key, especially when you get into the estate planning of, how does this look when one spouse passes away before the other? Because chances are that's going to happen, right? There's going to be a surviving spouse at some point. And since they each have, at this point, adult kids and possibly even grandkids from their initial spouses, they're now a bigger family, but at the end of the day, you don't want one spouse's assets to go to maybe just the other side of the family, right? So it's important to have this laid out ahead of time in some kind of an estate planning process. The best way typically to do that, and again, not an attorney, so not trying to give legal advice, but typically is going to be through some kind of a trust, that lays out the specifics of it to say, hey, if for instance, the husband passes away, his assets go into a trust that the surviving spouse is able to, take X amount or, pay for certain living expenses, whatever it is. I mean, this is where in a trust, whatever you can dream up, you can put in there and get it worked out. But if, at the end of the day, she passes, those assets in the trust now pass to his kids. Right. And she might have a similar trust that her assets go to that trust, that if she passes first, well, then the assets are left to the surviving spouse, him, to be able to help pay for his maintenance and support, so to speak. But then anything left go to her kids. The challenge with, especially if these are retirement accounts, then it gets a little tricky from a tax standpoint, because now you're naming trust as beneficiaries. There's a lot of potential traps that you have to be careful of there. But so having it laid out, first of all, just how do you want this to work, and then chances are it's going to end up being some kind of a trust vehicle that is going to be the best, give you the best end result, so that you're not, naming the other spouse as a primary beneficiary. It all goes to them. It's their asset now. And then now they've named their contingents, which is just their kids. And your kids are completely disinherited, which, short of dividing the assets right at death and saying, well, here, on half of it, I've got my kids named as primary. On the other half, I've got the spouse named as primary. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but that gets really messy. And how do you manage the two different investments? And So
Yeah, and she didn't even mention, leaving anything to her kids from his wealth. She was just more concerned about his kids getting the things that he wants them to have while also making sure she's protected. And I was going to say the basic, most simple thing to do, make sure that you do, is make sure that the BDs, the beneficiary designations, are the way that you need them to be. So if there's a particular policy that's going to need to go to her, to Judy, make sure that she's listed on that and not the ex-spouse or one of the kids, right? Things like
right.
that. There's simple stuff and then there's complicated stuff. So it depends on what you want to do.
Well, but this is one of those things that, oftentimes people don't even think it through, that they say, well, we'll just name the other spouse as the primary beneficiary. That's pretty common, right? For
Sure.
Especially for a couple that's been married and this is their kids together. That's the perfect scenario. Right. In this scenario, if you follow that same path, you can unintentionally disinherit the other side of the family, because maybe Judy already has an IRA set up where she's got, the new husband as the primary and then her kids as contingent. Well, then if his assets pass to her, it's her IRA. Now her kids are on as contingent. Well, you've just disinherited his kids. And you weren't even thinking of it that way, but it just happened.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's nothing you can change. So
that's great. That's a great point. Yeah. So
you just have to think it through up front of exactly what's going to happen. If we have it named this way, what does it look like?
Yeah. Okay. Great point. Yeah. There's definitely, it gets a little more complicated when you have more things going on as we age and more people. So, for sure. What a shock, right? More people complicates things. Who knew?
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Steve. Judy, thank you so much for submitting that in. Hopefully that helps. And if other folks are in a similar situation, obviously hope that gets them thinking about some stuff. Of course, as always, Phil's team reaches out to all the emails and they have conversations, specifically one-on-one on these things. But it's good to share that because, again, other people might be going through something similar. All right, Steve says, hey, Phil, I'm 58 and was informed by my company that I'm going to get laid off in 60 days. I'll be able to stay on the company health insurance plan for a year and getting a 6-month severance package. The package is the monthly pension option or the lump sum. How do you decide which one to go with? And is there any other thoughts that I need to be thinking of?
Steve, it sounds like you need a plan, right? So, there's no easy answer to take this, one option over the other than running a plan specifically for you. And it starts with, well, what do you need to live on, right? 58, you're kind of early from a retirement standpoint. It may not work. Who knows? I don't know the other assets you've accumulated. I don't know what you need on a monthly basis to live on. So there's a lot of moving pieces that plays into this, and especially that pension side. So pension question specifically, you have to look at the math to see, okay, well, what are they giving me on an income standpoint versus what are they giving me for a lump sum? Does it make sense? Am I giving up too much by taking the lump sum? But another side of that pension lump sum question to consider that often gets overlooked is the whole tax side of the equation, right? Because a pension is taxable income all the way through retirement, which, that's the good side of a pension is it's income all the way through retirement. But the other side of it is it's taxable income. So once you layer that on with Social Security, well, that pension is going to cause more of the Social Security to be taxable typically.
Yeah.
Having a lump sum might give us the opportunity to roll that into an IRA and then maybe reposition assets into Roth over time and lower taxes. So, it's, that's why I said it's too many moving parts to give just a specific answer. But you definitely need to talk to somebody so they can run through some math for your scenario specifically to show you, well, here's what it looks like. And it probably would make more sense to do maybe the pension in your case or the lump sum, depending on your scenario.
Well, let me reframe it this way, Phil, for just people who just get this question, because we get it all the time and advisors see it all the time.
Yep.
So when you're looking at those two options, is that where you should start? Is what are my income needs based on what I already have? If the monthly income from the pension is, kind of dire, like you really need that, does that kind of weigh more heavily? Or if you have enough other assets to create income, is that kind of how you start that conversation?
Yeah, you have to have, to me at least, right there. You can't answer that question by itself. I would never, if somebody came to me with that question, I would never be able to tell them take the pension or the lump sum with that information. We need to do an overall plan because I'm not giving you the best advice just answering pension or lump sum. I mean, we can do some quick math and tell you, I mean, if the pension adds up to be 10% of the lump sum annually, I mean, that's a big number, right? So chances are probably mathematically is going to make more sense to take the pension income because, hey, you only have to live without earnings 10 years for this to make sense. There's not a lot of investment options that you're going to have that's going to make it make sense to take the lump sum without looking at the tax side of the equation. That's why I say that's always the missing piece. And to answer the tax side of the equation, you need the bigger picture, right? You can't just look at those two pieces by themselves. So.
All right. Well, great question. Thank you so much, Steve. Obviously, it's always a challenge. That's why it's important to run through the math, right? So anyone in this kind of situation, make sure that you're talking with your advisor and run the math down. And of course, again, Phil's I was already going to reach out to Steve and have him in for a consultation and all that good jazz, but for other folks in the same similar situation.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
All right, so Lisa wants to know, she says, Phil, my husband wants to work for another decade, but he's 64, and that seems nuts to me. She says, I think we have enough money for him to retire sooner, but is there really any point in debating or arguing with it? Should I just let him work forever? And I think, Phil, when people are in this kind of situation, it's like maybe the husband, now it could be two reasons. Maybe he wants to work forever because he likes it. He wants to work another 10 years just because he likes it. Mm-hmm. But maybe he doesn't feel comfortable with where their money's at, or it doesn't feel comfortable on whether or not they can spend it, because she does mention she wants to travel a lot in retirement. So maybe he feels like he's having to kind of pad the accounts, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into this. I mean, Lisa, I would recommend you listen to a few podcasts ago. We talked about retirement planning being a team sport for a married couple, and this is oftentimes things that come up. In fact, I've got a client that fits this exact scenario. I mean, we had done the planning up front probably 5 years ago. And technically, because he had at that point been offered a buyout from one of the big automotive companies and was taking it, or wanted to take it and wanted to know how it looked. So we ran the numbers, and I mean, they could actually retire at that point. He could be done. But he really loved what he did. And he was kind of in the middle of a project at that point. So he did retire, took the buyout, but then got an offer from a consulting firm that this company had hired to bring him back in to kind of finish that project. So that's what he did in early retirement. But then he really enjoyed still working. So, now 5, almost 6 years later, he continued to work for that consulting company. And the wife is like, hey, when are you going to retire? When are you going to retire? And he just loves what he does, and he doesn't really have that passion of something else he's going to retire to, right? He hasn't found that.
Yeah.
So this has been his passion. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a discussion to have for sure, and ask him, well, why? What is your goal in working 10 more years? Realize, okay, you're going to be 74. My goal is to do more travel. Are you going to want to travel? And I don't want to do this on my own. So are you going to want to travel?
Right.
At 74. Right. And, I don't know, Lisa doesn't mention how old she is, but if she's 64, well, she'll be 74 then too. I mean, if she's younger, she'll be younger, but maybe he's not going to want to travel with. I mean, so there's a lot that goes into this. And I always joke and say, this is my consulting or my therapy hat goes on. And, we sit down and have that discussion, but it's an important discussion to have.
Yeah, and I hate to cast this out there, but it's entirely possible if they've been married a really long time, he could just like not being in the house, like he could like just being out and doing something, right? Not trying to point fingers or anything, but you never know what someone's reasoning is, and if you don't talk to them and find out, then you're left guessing, and then you're just going to get more frustrated because you want to travel, you want to be doing things, and he's working. So find out why. I think that's a great place to start. But yeah, I mean, if he's got his mind made up, then you've got to think about what you want to do then, and maybe make those plans for yourself, Lisa, and say, okay, fine. If you're going to work, I'm doing some other stuff.
Right. And I mean, let him know. Maybe he doesn't realize that, hey, I really want to do this. This is my goal. And the reality is we're aging and probably not going to be able to do some of the things I'd like to do in 10 years. So I would love to do this now. How important is it for you to continue working? I mean, if it's more that passion of doing that, well, maybe with that knowledge, he can retire, maybe take on a consulting job, where he's doing it, but more on his time frame, so that he can take time off and be able to do, travel with you, but then still, fulfill that need or that desire of his to continue working, but more on his terms. Because to me, that's retirement. Right? Retirement doesn't mean I don't work. It just means I work when and if I want to.
My guess, though, Phil, and this seems to be the case about 80% of the time, is that he just truly doesn't feel comfortable with a plan or a lack thereof, and he's not sure if he can retire and fund their lifestyle.
Yeah, and that would be my initial thought in this, is that he's probably heard her say, hey, I want to do a lot of travel. And he's thinking, okay, that's going to be expensive. It's going to take another 10 years. But unless you run the math, you don't know, right? Run the math. Let's figure it out to see. So you have the right answer to say, hey, you can. It's an option. So then let's act on that option.
Yeah.
Or if not, then Lisa knows that, okay, I'd really love to travel and do all this stuff in 10 years, but we can't afford it. So he's going to have to work for the next 10 years for us to do that. So then I need to adjust my goal. So, I mean, it's always a balance, right, between the two. So.
Yeah, great point. And Lisa, go check out an episode earlier this month, where we talk about regrets when you're over 70. That might be a good one for you guys to check out together, because you don't want to either one be in that situation. All right, we're getting a little long here, but I've got one more I want to just chime in real fast here. Phil, before we go, Ray wants to know, is it a problem to have two mortgages in retirement? They're moving into the new house and wants to use the old house for rental property, but he still has a mortgage on it. So I guess he's a little worried about having two mortgages. Yeah, the idea is the rental property, the old house, is going to pay its own mortgage, hopefully. And certainly with the rates out there right now, you can get some pretty good money for renting a place. But that's contingent on, having a renter.
Right. So there's, again, a lot that goes into this question. The way I would look at it, Ray, is that you need to be able to financially support both houses without extra income, right? Because that will happen for some period of time. Hopefully not a very long period of time. Maybe it's only 2-3 months as you transition renters and kind of fix things up, but it could be an extended period of time. And you don't want to get yourself into a position where it's been a year, right? And you've not been able to find a new renter, or maybe the prior renter has done just significant damage to this property. So it takes a lot of capital first to get it fixed up. So you can't rent it. So you have this extended period of time. So adding that second mortgage, especially when it's having a rental property, adds more risk to the plan. Not to say it's not going to work. Very well could work, but just look at that risk side of it to see, could I support it? How long could I support it if I didn't have income? And that would at least get you pointed in the right direction to know, okay, yeah, it does make sense, or I'm willing to take on that risk. Or let's say that, yeah, it does work and it's cash flowing really well today. Well, then I would recommend you bank a bunch of that extra revenue today up front, in the event that you have this time frame that you don't have a renter. So at least you've got a pool that you can pull from. Don't start spending that revenue up front. But if you're counting on this net rental income to fund your retirement, that's going to be pretty risky, because you could find yourself in a scenario where you not only don't have the income, but now you got two mortgages. How long are the assets going to last?
Spin down's going to get going fast. So great questions. Thanks so much for all the different emails that come in. We certainly appreciate them. We do these once in a while here on the program, just again to shine some light on things that most people are going through. So if you're in a similar situation, need some help, if you think you're in some crazy, wild, unique situation that Phil's never seen or an advisor's never seen, you could be right, but probably not. They've seen a lot. Reach out to them, get on the calendar, have a conversation with a qualified professional like Phil. He's a CPA and a personal finance financial specialist, and you can find him online at philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Click the thumbs up and the notification there to catch new episodes, and check the show notes for details and links. And we'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Phil?
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.